Good morning and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodholt. This week we're spending time looking at Bible stories of forgiveness, and we've looked at two from Genesis, and now we're going to jump all the way to the New Testament for some stories there. It's not that there aren't other Old Testament stories of forgiveness. There are many, but we're going to look at these from the ministry of Jesus too. Our story today is the one about the woman caught in adultery. And first, we need to admit there's not much adult about adultery. And in Bible times, there was something of a double standard. Men caught in adultery were often excused. Women bore the brunt of the scandal. In fact, the brunt of the scandal was so harsh that the adulteress was killed. They stoned her, which means they threw rocks at her until she died. Well, one day Jesus came to the temple, and the scribes and the Pharisees brought to him a woman who had been caught in adultery. "Our law says that we should stone her," they said to Jesus. "Now what do you say?" Now they had planned this as a trap. If Jesus said to stone her, the scribes and the Pharisees would be able to say that all this talk Jesus had been giving about love and forgiveness was just empty words, just talk, and he didn't really mean it. On the other hand, if Jesus said to let her go, then they could say that he was speaking against the law of Moses and saying heretical things, and they could stone him for that. Either way, they hoped to turn the crowds away from him. Jesus bent down and drew in the dirt for a little while, and I have to admit that that's always been part of this story that intrigues me. What was he doing? Was he thinking of how to answer? What did he draw? Was he just giving time for tension to build or to make sure everyone was paying attention? We don't know the answers for any of that. What we do know is that eventually Jesus stood up and said simply, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Can't you just imagine the silence that ensued as they all pondered that? Can't you imagine the guilt as they suddenly saw their own failures and sins? Can't you imagine how some perceived the grace in Jesus' words? One by one, they dropped their stones and left until Jesus was there with the woman alone. "I don't condemn you either," Jesus said. "Go and sin no more." There's a lot to learn about forgiveness there. Sometimes, like scribes and the Pharisees, we can get caught up in our own self-righteousness, easily seeing the wrong in others without ever considering how we have wrong in us too. Maybe even more challenging is the idea of the understanding and compassion we should have for one another. We have all walked the walk of sin, and deep down we know we are no better than anyone else. And all sins are just as bad as any others. I remember seeing a sign once that said, "Don't judge someone just because they sin differently than you." Sometimes we aren't eager to forgive some types of sins that we think are worse than others. But from God's perspective, every sin is seen as rebellion against the kingdom of God. We are called to live God's way, and any other way is wrong, no matter what it is. The story of the woman caught in adultery is a powerful story of forgiveness and grace. which also calls us to drop our stones too. We are called to live, giving that same love and grace in our lives, the same love and grace that we have received. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.